the president of Citizens Against Government Waste. And Tom, by the way, I applied for a job there with you guys back in 1991. I had a chance to interview you when I worked at Channel 9, and I was so completely enamored and in love with what you guys were doing. I thought, that's what I want to do for a living. I want to work for Tom. And I was shocked. One, you're still doing this. Two, you're like the portrait of Dorian Gray. You haven't aged at all. You have been pounding away at this since 1984. The Grace Commission under Ronald Reagan said, listen, I want you guys to be like bloodhounds and find the waste. 161 corporate executives, 2,000 volunteers stepped up, and they ended up raising $76 million. And they drop a great big report with more than 2,000 and some pages. It would say you'd save $424 billion just back in 84. You guys have been at this for a very, very long time. And here you are. You are still doing it, Tom. Do you feel like now finally people are starting to look to the Citizens Against Government Waste and this DOGE people? Like finally you've got your day in the bright light to get rid of all this corruption and waste and fraud and abuse?
Well, absolutely. First of all, I'm sure you understand why we rejected you, because we knew you'd have an amazing career in radio.
Oh, yeah. Here we go, Tom. Here we go. We'll leave that aside.
Leave it aside.
Yeah,
but yes, we've been doing this a long time. Many of the recommendations that DOGE is implementing have been proposed by Citizens Against Government Waste. For example, 10 years ago, we suggested eliminating the penny because it costs 3 to 4 cents to make a penny. What's the point? We have long suggested eliminating the Department of Education, starting with Ronald Reagan, who, of course, established the President's Private Sector Survey on Cost Control, which became known as the Grace Commission. And he asked Peter Grace and Jack Anderson to create Citizens Against Government Waste to make sure those recommendations were implemented. So we've saved about $2.4 trillion since the organization was created in 84. I got there in 86, and we are thrilled that someone is finally doing something about it. Everybody talks about eliminating waste. Obviously, there are going to be things that may not happen the way people like them, like your earlier report about some people losing their jobs. But nonetheless, over time, this has to be done. I shouldn't say over time. It has to be done now, because as Elon Musk said on Hannity, if we don't, the country can go bankrupt, because countries do go bankrupt.
You're a very smart guy, even though you didn't hire me. But, Tom, you look at the numbers. Really, unless you do something about entitlements and the payment of the interest on the debt and all, the big, big numbers, I mean, you can, nibble away at the edges, but something has to be done about the entitlement. And so don't you feel like you're pushing a giant rock up a hill?
Yes, there is that. We have a padded room in the office for those times when we get frustrated.
Okay.
But nonetheless, progress is made. You can take the $236 billion in improper payments. Medicare, Medicaid, supplemental security income, SSI, are 3 of the top 5 areas where that is done. So you could save tens of billions of dollars from Medicare, Medicaid, and supplemental security income without affecting benefits. In fact, you would help people who are getting benefits, because you wouldn't be wasting money to deliver benefits to those that aren't eligible. So a lot of this is logical, common sense. You could raise the retirement age. I know they're not talking about it, but they did that once. People are living longer, working longer. Social Security is an intergenerational transfer. Money from working people goes into the trust fund, pays people who are eligible and may or may not be working. So it's a big Ponzi scheme. Everybody knows it. And eventually, those payments are not going to be made. It's already not bringing in enough money to make the payments.
And you're not going to get any politician that's going to stand up in front of any camera or microphone and say, I want to change Social Security. I mean, that is the third rail of politics.
Yeah, but you can do, all those other things should be done first. What DOGE is doing in terms of trying to consolidate, eliminate wasteful spending. I talked to the Department of Education for a second. My whole generation grew up without a Department of Education. People forget it was created in 1977. Was no one educated before that? Well, if you look at the numbers, spending has gone up, test scores have gone flat. So if the objective is to spend the money to increase the test scores, all it's done is build bureaucracy and made it harder for kids to learn.
Why do you think there is this hue and cry that is coming out against these cuts?
It's the entrenched special interests in Washington, D.C., and especially those that think that they're entitled to their jobs. So there's a little other sense of entitlement around here that, well, if you come and work for the government, you're kind of secure and comfortable, and the results honestly don't matter that much. And that's how Congress works too. If a program isn't succeeding, quote unquote, what do? They create another program. Right? You don't have another one of you, like, or six of you doing the same job. But that's what happens in Washington. 133 broadband programs. That's one of my favorites, right? People still are not connected to the internet. There are unserved and underserved communities. 15 agencies and 133 programs. You need 3 that work and connect people.
You come out with your pig book every year, and I know Rand Paul likes to read from it there in the floor of the Senate about all the waste. And at a certain point, it just, these numbers just start to, your eyes glaze over. But you have been doing this. You've been in there since 86, since 84, when the order came from President Reagan. You have seen this stuff. Do any of these congressmen, any of these senators that push a lot of this junk, and I'm sure you could name a few that are your favorites, do they ever come back to you and say anything like, hey, don't be talking about that, or, I need to do that in order to get this vote or that vote? It's so unbelievably disrespectful to the taxpayer.
Well, it's the, Tip O'Neill said all politics are local, meaning that everybody looks after their own district, their own state, and then when they need a project or want a project, they simply add it in or make a deal with someone else to get what they want, so they get it. That's what the pork barrel earmarks are all about. Appropriations Committee members get a much larger percentage of the money than they represent in Congress. Like 15% of Congress are on these committees, and they get 50 to 60% of the money and the earmarks. So that's certainly disproportionate. And they then control how that money gets spent, because they say to the other members, if you want a project, you got to vote for this giant spending bill.
Give me the worst case scenario. If DOGE doesn't really do much, or it gets shut down, if a judge steps in, or it loses, Elon Musk's focus, what happens to America by, let's say, 2035?
Well, the deficit is $2 trillion. The deficit, meaning the difference between revenue and expense, is $2 trillion on the wrong side. We're spending $2 trillion more. So the debt will go up by another $20 trillion in 10 years. It's already $36 trillion. And we haven't spent like this as a country since World War II. And we are not at war. We're going to be financing some, but that's probably going to change. But we're not in a world war. We are at peacetime. The spending that occurred in the Biden administration after COVID accelerated inflation. It fed into the problems throughout the economy. And it's time to kind of turn off the spigot and move things in the other direction.
Are you hopeful?
I'm hopeful that DOGE will succeed despite all of the angst. I testified before the House Oversight Committee on February 5th. It was quite entertaining. I've done this many, many times since I've been at CAGW. And this was just pretty crazy. It was all about Elon needs to be fired and what's he doing and why is he doing this. They didn't recommend a single spending cut on the Democratic side. I'm
going to watch that because I do love that you have the data, you've got the facts, you have the passion that's had you in there since 1986. And I'll also forgive you for not hiring me. Perhaps it's the best thing or worst thing that ever happened in my life. Tom, keep up the good work. We'll check back with you as more of these cuts become more apparent, and we'll continue to watch the great work that's done there, Citizens Against Government Waste. Tom, thank you very much.